Welcome, everybody, uh, to our Discovery series. Today, we'll be talking about how to create wildlife-friendly backyards. I am going to give just some general strokes and suggestions about creating wildlife-friendly backyards. You can take this so many different ways. You can focus on attracting a particular species, a particular group of animals. So there's a lot you can do out there. There's a lot of materials out there too as well. And I'll try and offer some suggestions about some resources that you can use to start exploring more on your own. So, first off, are we gonna do it? Yeah. All wildlife have four basic requirements that they need in order to survive. So, food, and that can include seeds, berries, grasses themselves, nectar, um, caterpillars, depends on the animal for what food they are looking for. Water, how those particular species go about acquiring water varies from animal to animal, but all animals need water. They need shelter, someplace to raise their young that is protected from potential predators, but also protected from the elements too, extreme heat as we are experiencing in the summer times here in South Carolina, and also cold too. So they need places that are going to help insulate them from either the cold or from the heat. And then they also need enough space to acquire all those other resources. And space really varies from species to species. If you have a small animal, they don't need that much space, but you have a large animal, a white-tailed deer, is going to have a lot more need of space than something like even a frog or an insect of something like that. And so first off, we're going to talk about food. And with that food, a lot of the time we might think about food because we're seeing it in the spring and summertime, but food needs to be available throughout the year, and those food resources might shift a little bit throughout the year depending on what's available. Um, but animals in particular are looking for hard mast or soft mast, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. And so like squirrels, they're gonna like to go after seeds and nuts. You'll see them munching on pine cones. Um, Recently, going into Nemours, I've seen a bunch of fox squirrels chowing down on all of the different mushrooms that are currently out with all this rain right now. And then insects are going to rely on host plants and the food their food can be somewhat specific. And food can also be dead standing trees or dead twigs and sticks and everything. But you can also supplement food too. So you don't necessarily have to have a plethora of food wherever your backyard is or wherever you're trying to create wildlife habitat. Maybe you don't have a lot of space, but you have the ability to put out some supplemental food. So it runs the gambit. But wildlife in general really like what's called mast. And mast is just this term that refers to the reproductive bodies of plants that the animals are actually eating. So it's the good, tasty stuff from the plant. So for hard mass, that's going to be from like our maples and our hickories. We're going to have hard shelled seeds, walnuts, acorns, pecans, all of that would be what's called hard mast. And then soft mast is going to be our fruits and berries. So very generally fleshy and don't last as long. So there's trade-offs to both of these masts. So with hard mast, because they have that hard shell acts as protection for the seed. Makes it more difficult for animals to get into the seed, actually, which is one of the reasons for the hard shell. Um, but it also increases the lifespan of those seeds. So they can be eaten pretty much throughout the year, or at least more, have a longer time frame where wildlife might find them and eat them. They also have a really high energy content. There's a lot of carbohydrates and fats in those seeds, so they pack a good punch when it comes to wildlife and getting their energy needs from the food they're trying to find. And so, if you have a big backyard, um, and yeah, if you want to plant a tree, oaks, hickories, walnuts, pecans, they're all great for hard mast. And the time to plant them was 20 years ago, but otherwise, the time to plant trees is now because they're only going to keep growing every day from now. And then the other one, we had the hard mast and the soft mast. That's going to be like our persimmons, American beautyberry, dewberries, anything that has those fleshy fruits. And so, again, much shorter shelf life. Uh, they rot very quickly. Wildlife find them very quickly too, and they know when the plant has ripe fruit, and if you're looking to pick a persimmon or eat some dewberries, well, I bet you most of the time the wildlife are finding those ripe fruit way before that you even know that they're ripe. And they're not going to be available, generally speaking, throughout the winter months. They just don't keep very long. But they do have a lot of vitamins in them. They have a lot of sugars and a lot of carbohydrates. So they are a good source of energy for wildlife as well. And again, some of the native plants that produce soft mass are going to be our blackberries, American beautyberry, verbenum, blueberries. All of those are great food sources for wildlife in general. But there's a lot more out there that can be counted as mast. So our wildflowers, our grasses all produce seeds, a little much smaller than the trees and some of our shrubs with their fruiting bodies. But those seeds are still going to be eaten by a lot of different animal species, including birds. Including some of our small mammals. You'll have the pine seeds from all of our pine trees. And actually, wildlife will even eat the catkins from trees as well, too. So, mast is not just, you don't have to just consider mast as those hard seeds versus those soft-bodied fruits. They can also be the seeds that are coming from something like a coneflower, anything in the Echinacea flower family, and any of our grasses that might be growing either wild in fields around here, or if you have like a little meadow in your own backyards. And what's really important to think about, and in general, is plants are going to be the bottom of the food chain. So, without having plants and the fruits, the seeds they produce, you're not going to have a lot of other wildlife out there because every other wildlife species relies on plants in some way, shape, or fashion. So with pollinators, they generally rely on plants as for their host. So that's going to be they're going to lay their eggs on a particular host plant. That host plant, those eggs will hatch and produce larval caterpillars, which will eat the leaves of that host plant. As the caterpillar matures, goes into the chrysalis, it will emerge as a butterfly, and that butterfly might require the same host plant for its nectar source, or it might have a little bit more general needs, and it can use a variety of different plants as a nectar source. So when we look at butterfly life cycles, we've got the monarch butterfly, which I'm sure most of you have at least heard of. and are very much tied to our milkweed plants. So they are going, the adult butterfly will fly around looking for a milkweed plant to lay their eggs. They lay their eggs on the leaves of the milkweed. Those eggs hatch, and our larval caterpillar emerges. They eat the leaves of the they eat the leaves of the milkweed, and then they'll actually incorporate some of the like there if you ever break a milkweed stem, it has this like milky sap consistency, and that is ends up being toxic to animal species. So they incorporate those toxins into their body and makes them very unpalatable to anything that might want to eat them, like a bird. And so once they emerge from their crystal, they'll wrap themselves in their chrysalis on that milkweed leaf and eventually emerge from it as the adult butterfly. And the adult butterfly doesn't necessarily require milkweeds as their nectar source. They will definitely use milkweeds, but they will also visit other flowers for nectar as well. So when you think pollinators, we have to think about the host plants that they rely on and the nectar sources they rely on. And so there's a wide variety of host plants, and some species of host plants are going to attract a lot of different pollinator species. Oaks have so many different pollinators that will use them as host plants. And then there are some species of plants that might be very specific to just a few different species of pollinators. And so if you are really interested in attracting a specific type a butterfly, you're going to want to up that information about that butterfly, whatever it may be. So maybe it's your monarch butterfly, and you're going to then incorporate the host plants that it relies on to create wildlife friendly backyards and habitat for that individual species. So if we're thinking, there. So again, attracting specific species. If we think about our monarch, that's going to rely on milkweed species. We have a few native milkweeds here, including common milkweed and swamp milkweed, that are going to be these perennial wildflowers. So once, and if you can get them established, they will hopefully be around for a long time. I am currently trying to grow some in my backyard and having limited success because the deer apparently like the milkweeds that I've planted as well and will munch on the milkweeds, and then I am back to square one. If you're interested in a cloudless sulfur, which you might be seeing fluttering around right now, it's this bright yellow butterfly. It's going to require plants from the legume family, the Cinas, as their host plant to lay their eggs on. So partridge pea is a great example of something of a plant species that the cloudless sulfur would need as its host species, and it produces those lovely little yellow flowers that you see down in the bottom of the picture there. If you like the zebra heliconian, then passion flowers are going to be what you want to incorporate into your backyard. Again, they require those passion flowers to lay their eggs on and for their larvae to hatch from the leaves of the passion flowers. And this is a great species that if you have a fence line and sunny, you can have some passion flowers along that fence line and it will vine right up along the fence itself. And a species that's a little bit more of a generalist. So those ones that I named previously, uh, They specialize in particular plant species as their host plant. So if you don't have milkweeds, you're not going to get monarchs. If you don't have passion flowers, you're probably not going to see the zebra heliconian. The common buckeye right here, it can use a variety of different species as its larval host plant. So you can do figworts, vervains, and so many others. And so you have this mix of plants that again act as a host for many different species, and some plants that maybe only act as a host for one plant, for one pollinator species. And then another one I like to throw out here is maybe you just are more interested in creating a colorful backyard. I recommend using native plants for that because our native plants are going to support a lot of our native wildlife here. And so, for example, coral honeysuckle, if you plant this species, it's a native vining plant in the southeast. It's going to attract actually a large variety of wildlife too, including our ruby-throated hummingbirds, those red flowers in general, especially that are tubular in shape, are flowers that are attractive to birds. Red, anything that's red is generally a flower that's attractive to bird species. And then that tubular shape is the perfect shape for the ruby-throated hummingbird to get its bill in there, and then it'll stick its tongue down into the flower and lap up the nectar from the coral honeysuckle. But we're also going to have butterflies and moths that are using this as a host plant for their larvae. So the blue butterfly there, that's an azure. It's going to use the leaves of the coral honeysuckle as a larval host plant, and then we'll have bees pollinating this coral honeysuckle as well, collecting the pollen for themselves and tangentially pollinating the rest of the coral honeysuckle. So again, it really depends on what you want to focus on. You could focus specifically on attracting pollinators to your habitat. Maybe you're more interested in seeing a diversity of bird species, and they're all going to need food resources. All of those food resources are going to rely on plants in some shape or fashion, whether the plants are going to be the food resource for the wildlife you want to attract, or the plant is going to be where your wildlife finds the food that they're going to eat. And don't just focus necessarily on the plants themselves. Snags or dense standing trees are also where wildlife are going to find food. Woodpeckers are going to need those snags in order to drill into it and find beetles and ants that are making tunnels in that dead wood. Stumps are great for beetles too, as well. And leaf litter is another great source of either places where we're going to have beetles that are slowly decomposing that leaf litter, or your wildlife is looking for food in the leaf litter. And supplemental food is definitely another great tactic for create for attracting wildlife, creating food for wildlife to utilize. Um, Really easy one that a lot of people have, bird feeders. Hummingbird feeders right now. Our hummingbirds are getting ready to fly down from here to Central America, fly over the Gulf of Mexico, and find a warmer place for the winter, and then they'll come back in early spring and stay here throughout the summer to nest. And they need food resources in order to make that migration trip. So they're flying over 24 hours to make that trip from the tip of Florida all the way across the Gulf to Central South America area. Suet, especially in the wintertime, is a great source of extra energy for bird species. Squirrels will potentially go after those as well, so it depends on what you want to feed. Peanuts and mealworms are all great supplemental foods. And I will say, I don't personally feed the squirrels, but my dad, he loves to feed all the wildlife, including the squirrels, including the deer. He'll actually feed the deer apples and will buy peanuts and corn for the deer and the turkeys as well. So you can go so many different ways for providing supplemental food. But what I want to talk about for bird feeders in particular is just some safe practices. Next slide. So, for bird feeders, if you want to attract again specific birds, they have their favorite foods just like we have our favorite foods. So, mourning doves and sparrows are going to like millets, uh, sunflower seeds, and saffron seeds are going to attract blue jays. Cardinals love them, chickadees, titmice. You'll see those at your feeders. And any of those seed-eating birds, you're gonna have be more likely to see at your feeders than other species that are eating insects. So warblers are pretty much only eating insects. That's the majority of their diet. They might occasionally in the wintertime switch to seeds a little bit more. So it's really hard to attract them and provide supplemental food. You can try with mealworms. Some people do that, especially in the summertime with bluebirds. If they have bluebird boxes, they might put out a stand for meal with mealworms or dried mealworms, and the adult bluebirds will go there because they're eating predominantly insects. And some birds are eating mostly fruits. So our Baltimore Oriole, Orchard Orioles are eating fruits, and you can have feeders where you put some oranges out or some grape jelly that might attract them as well. But when you're feeding birds, it's important to keep their safety in mind. So there are some best practices when it comes to having bird feeders around your house or your apartment or wherever you might live. And one of the main ones is just to clean it regularly. So once that food gets consumed by the birds, you're going to want to make sure to give it a good scrub down with a dilute bleach or vinegar solution to make sure it's clean and dry before adding any more food to it. If the seed does ever get wet, you're going to want to dispose of that moldy wet food because funguses and bacterias can grow in there, and then the birds will eat it and potentially get sick themselves. Also, bird feeders are a potential place for predators to gravitate towards because they know there's going to be food in that area. So you're going to want to offer ways that the birds can be protected from those potential predators. And that's generally through having some sort of cover or shelter. So putting your bird feeder near a bush or a shrub, or a hedgerow might be a good way to offer that shelter. They're going to go to the bird feeder, eat, and then go back to the shrub to hide from any potential predator like a hawk, uh, or actually a stray or feral cat that's out. There's that cover offers protection for them. And then also making sure that when you're placing your bird feeders, you don't want to place them uh, too. Uh, there's a 3 foot zone that's really good if you place it by your windows that doesn't cause birds the issue with potential window strikes. But if you put it between like 3 and 6 feet away, then there's the potential for those birds to fly into your window and hit it and actually die from that impact. So you really want to put it like 3 feet or less from a window or over 6 feet away. And that generally helps reduce the likelihood of those window collisions for birds. If you put it nice and close to your house, well, then it makes it easier for you to have be able to see the wildlife, but you also have to think about building in that protection too. So maybe you have some shrubs at one side of your window and you're going to put the bird feeder near those shrubs so it's still close to the window so they don't have the window strike, but it's also still offering cover as well. And just anytime you might notice um, any sort of disease going around the birds. So sometimes birds will develop this like conjunctivitis around the eyes. You're going to want to remove your feeders and just keep them out and not feeding the birds until that outbreak dissipates because what will happen is the birds with the disease visit the feeder and then infect others, healthy birds, as those healthy birds go to the same feeders. And so next up, we've got water. And water can come in many different forms. So you can have a little small uh, stream by your house. You might have a bird bath. And the ways that wildlife species go about getting water does depend on the species themselves. So there are three types of ways that wildlife are going to obtain water. The first one, the free water source, that's going to be like your rivers, your streams, your ponds, a puddle after a rainstorm, anywhere there is standing water available. The preformed water is actually water that they get from their diet, from eating a succulent plant like a cactus or grasses. Um, Eating whatever food they eat. Very much, if when you eat watermelon, it's like almost 70% water content in there. So you're not necessarily needing to drink water because you're consuming that water through the food that you're actually eating. And then metabolic water is the water that's made through metabolic processes from the splitting of carbon dioxide. And most wildlife are going to get their water through either free water source or through from preformed water. Butterfly puddle dishes are a great way to provide some of our pollinators with a source of water and potentially um, some macronutrients as well. So you can do these pretty easily, and they're just mimicking these shallow ponds or puddles after a rainstorm. If you get like a terracotta um, pot, shallow pot that's used to catch water from the actual pot for the plant. You can put sand and gravel and some larger stepping stones in there, and then just fill it up with some water. And then that gives this differences in the height of the water and the ability to access water for these pollinator species. So that when they land on it, they actually are able to drink the water from the ground itself. But make sure to replace the water regularly so that they don't have the potential for mosquitoes to lay their eggs in there, and it just helps it keep it fresh. And so, what you're again trying to mimic is something like this out on the landscape where we have these eastern swallowtails that are just have found a little wet area and they're congregating in that area because there's water and there's also essential minerals that they are consuming with this puddling. And not all species of butterflies tend to puddle, but there are a good amount that actually do. Bird baths, if you want to attract birds, are another great source of water. of creating water. So they're going to use these bird baths not only to drink, but also to bathe. They're using those bird baths to get off the dust on their skin, mites, and everything like that. And you want to have bird baths that aren't super deep and have these shallow, gradual transitions again so that you can have birds of different sizes using the bird baths. And same with the butterfly puddle dishes, you're going to want to clean these regularly because they're going to get dirty. Birds are going to poop there. You're going to have the potential for mosquitoes to lay their eggs, and then you don't want more mosquitoes in your backyard. Uh, but bird baths are a great way of attracting birds specifically, and birds really like moving water. So if you really want to go out, you can create a little bubbler in your bird bath, and that will probably attract even more birds to the bath itself. And it will also help with keeping the mosquitoes down too, added bonus. Uh, if you have an area, you can do a wildlife pond. So this is actually going to be a permanent water source, but it doesn't have fish or anything in it. And you'll plant native plants in it for about 50% of the pond and create again some areas of different depths so that you can have birds maybe landing on the edge of it and going to get a drink of water. And then this will also enable some of our amphibians to have access to that, frogs, toads. It's a great way to bring them to your backyards if you're interested. Again, mosquitoes though. Uh, and potentially, if you have a place that tends to just be flooded for periods of time after rain, you can consider a rain garden. So these are depressions in the landscape where you're going to plant native wetland plant species that are going to help with absorbing stormwater runoff, capturing that rain and filtering it through the soil. Um, and so Clemson has a rainwater garden course, and they will go through all the ins and outs of creating these rain gardens. I am by no means an expert on that, but it is an option if you potentially have a suitable area for it. So if that is something that you're interested in, I'd recommend you uh, look at type in rain gardens, Clemson, and there will be people to contact and reach out to for assistance for creating something for yourself. And water doesn't have to come in there. It can come in really small forms too. So after a rainstorm, you can, if you have some hosta plants, well, they have really thick leaves. They're going to hold water on those leaves. Same if you have magnolia leaves that you don't rake up all the time, that after a rain or after the morning dew will collect, and that is a potential water source as well. So leaves on the ground will collect that rain, and it also helps the soil retain moisture as well, which is important for some of our insects that are going to be living in the soils that our birds might be looking forward to eating and after they find them. Then we've got shelter. Again, shelter can be a snag, can be a cavity, can just be those leaves on the ground. It can be a brush pile. It can be a shrub. Again, anything that's offering protection from potential predators, but also from the elements as well. So, as I said, shelter comes in many forms. These are some of them. So we've got caves and ledges, tree cavities, snags, tree tops, really dense vegetation, leaf litter. Our oaks, our live oaks and oaks in general, have a lot of leaves that they are constantly seem to be dropping. So if you ever get sick of it, just say, I'm leaving the leaves for shelter for our wildlife species. Abandoned structures that from humans are can be great for wildlife. You'll find a lot of bats in abandoned structures, debris piles. If you like snakes, are a great place for snakes to hide. Um, and so again, that's going to offer that protection from the predators, a place to raise their young, protection from the elements, and just a safe place for them to rest whenever they're not looking for food and water and trying to survive. Um, so natural cavities are great for wildlife. They are can be a limited um, element on the landscape. It's really hard to find a natural cavity because they are really only made by woodpeckers. And those woodpeckers are using them for raising their nestlings in. And once they raise their nestlings, a lot of the woodpeckers that reuse don't reuse their nests. So they're going to build a new nest every spring, summertime to raise their young. And then other species are going to move in and also, natural cavities can be created by storm events where a windstorm will break off a portion of a branch, and that branch or that tree will then heal up and create a cavity where it's exposed to the elements, where a screech owl can use it to escape harsh winds from a storm. And if you do have trees in your backyard that you might be worried about, you can, but you also want to keep it if at all possible. That's something that if an arborist might come out and evaluate whether or not the tree is a safety concern. So if you can, good to keep those snags, those cavities, but always make sure that there's no safety concerns around keeping those natural cavities. Again, that goes the same with snags too. So our beetles are going to be burrowing into those snags. Uh, so there'll be plenty of beetles and invertebrates. The birds will go after those. Small mammals will use the areas that have been created holes from woodpeckers to go into and rest. So you might find a flying squirrel in a tree in a cavity that has been created by a pileated woodpecker or red-bellied woodpecker. Um, and so again, if you have a large area and it's not going to affect your house or somebody else's house, it's good to just leave those snags whenever possible. And snags, wood in general, are good for our smallest animals, like our salamanders, to our largest animals. Black bears are going to use snags to actually sometimes hibernate in the wintertime. If you ever get a chance, talk to Dr. Bridges about his PhD research. He was actually looking with working with black bears and tracking them and finding where they hibernate in the winter time. So he has lots of experience with snags and black bears. And brush piles are another great source of shelter for a diversity of wildlife. Birds will use those brush piles to hide. Snakes will use those brush piles. Small mammals will use those brush piles. And so you want to place them, away from any structures. They're great around forest edges or field edges so that wildlife have a place to move through those transition areas that they feel protected from. And as I mentioned a few times now, leaf litter is a great source of cover, really important for a lot of our ground dwelling insects. And a lot of species in general that are our smallest animals rely on leaf litter as cover. So if you want if when you see fireflies, well, that means there's going to be some leaf litter somewhere around nearby. Box turtles, moths will overwinter in the leaf litter as well. Toads will overwinter or bury just down into the leaf litter and the ground as protection. So hundreds and hundreds of animals survive in leaf litter over the winter time. So, when possible, it is good to at least leave some areas of your lawn with the leaf litter or have a leaf pile too, is another potential to increase that area where our smallest animals have protection from the elements, have that safe place to go to. And then creating thermal cover. This can be done with some evergreen plant species that are going to be, places to keep warm in the wintertime, but also offers shade in the summertime. And so that's that year-round protection from the elements and from the harsh winds, the harsh heat, the harsh cold. Some good thermal cover examples is our red cedar, magnolia, hollies, wax myrtles, um, rhododendrons. They're all going to be thick and offer some dense vegetation for buffering the temperatures outside of the plant species from the inside, so those animals have that sheltered area to go to. Um, and when natural shelter is lacking, just like you can supplement with bird feeders and supplemental food, you can also create supplemental shelter as well. So we've got a bat box in the upper corner as well as an insect house too. So a lot of our native pollinators are going to nest in hollowed out plant stems, in leaf litter. So you can create different you can create a structure with different types of shelter for those native pollinators. So the bottom has some pine cones and leaves in it, and then there's some bamboo stalks in the middle, as well as a stump with that's just been drilled with holes, and then that creates an abundance of shelter for our native bee species for the most part. And then the bottom is actually a toad abode or toad hotel, and that's if you ever get a broken terracotta pot and don't know what to do with it, you can put it out on its side in the backyard, and then that is a nice sheltered spot that's going to be moist for those toads. If you cover it over with some leaves, uh, that'll also further provide some insulation as well. So different shelters depending on the wildlife you want to create. And especially when it comes to bird houses, you're going to want to make sure that you put in some predator guards so that those snakes that you also might be attracting with with the habitat you're creating don't have easy access to a tasty egg or a tasty nestling. So they can be what's called these stovepipe baffles that just make it really difficult for a snake or other predator to climb up the metal pole. Same with the metal cones. You don't want to hang it like the picture on the left-hand side shows, right on the trunk of a tree, because that provides really easy access for predators, in particular snakes, to get into the birdhouse. If you put the house on a metal pole, it's really smooth. It's already difficult for animals to get up. And then if you put the predator guard on that metal pole, it makes it even more difficult. So then they actually have a really safe place to raise their young. And also, when you do put out these bird houses or a bat house, you're going to want to make sure that it's not really touching any trees next to it because that's going to be another point where a predator could get from the tree limb to the house and access those eggs and those nestlings. So you want to make sure that when they're using these bird houses, that you're not just creating food sources for other wildlife to eat, and maybe that's what you actually want to accomplish. I don't know. And so those insect houses, as I already talked about, you can provide different types of material and bedding for these insects, and they're going to be used by our solitary bees and other insects, not honeybees. Honeybees are going to nest in colonies. And those toad hotels, easy, do it yourself, can come in multiple forms. So this right here where it says Toad Hall is really just a couple pieces of board that are in a shaded area, and it's a great place for toads to overwinter and provides a moist space for them. So again, so many different varieties of shelter depends on what you are interested in attracting and what the size of your area is that you're working with. So no two places, no two people are going to have exactly the same shelter that they're creating when they're attracting wildlife to their backyards. And then lastly, we'll just talk really briefly about this is space. And again, that's wildlife require a certain amount of space in order to meet all of their needs. So like the home range of a white-tailed deer is going to be much larger than the potential home range of a spotted salamander. But that spotted salamander might have an area where it relies on a stream for, and then it'll come out onto the land briefly too. So it's going to have different needs depending on the time of year in order for it to survive. And again, it's going to vary a lot by species and also by the quality of the habitat, and the food, the water that it can find in an area. And so, space when it comes to backyard habitat, you only have your backyard to work with. So, think about when you're thinking about creating habitat and what you want to build, what food and shelter is available throughout your neighborhood, and how does your yard fit into the larger landscape? Maybe you're right next to a little forested lot, and so you already have a good amount of food and shelter built in. Or maybe your neighbor has a little hedgerow that you can build on too and create an extra avenue for wildlife to travel. And so there are a few just I want takeaways I want you to think about as you go about trying to potentially create wildlife habitat in your backyard. And this is not something that's going to happen very quickly. It takes years and years to like slowly create and develop the thriving backyard full of native plants and wildlife that are attracted to it. So take it in small, manageable segments. But importantly, you want to include native plants. And so the reason for this is native plants and insects have co-evolved together. So plants bloom when the insects are starting to emerge from the winter time. They generally have the most nutritional content for those species as well. You can definitely use some non-native plants, especially if some that are particularly colorful, but it's good to have at least, like, if you can, about a 50-50 mix of native versus non-natives. And then this is actually a book, Native Plants of the Southeast. It's a great guide to helping to choose some of your native plant species and that are good for your garden. And in general, you have to water them less. You don't really have to fertilize them because they're adapted to live in the southeast, so they can tolerate the droughts and they can tolerate those heavy downpours that we sometimes get to. Second, you want to invite biodiversity. So that can mean planting different plant species, but also just maximizing the biodiversity already in your lawn by potentially mowing less if you can, leaving those leaves so you can create shelter for those insects, or creating like a meadow in a section of your lawn where you don't want to mow it and you don't need that open, you don't need a typical garden lawn for whatever reason. Um, and creating vertical diversity is really important because different animal species are going to rely on different aspects of the plant species that develop. So with your ground cover, you're going to get sparrows, and those are where your toads and most of your insects are going to be. But with shrubs, you're going to have different other bird species in your mid-story and your canopy. You're going to have, that's where you'll see, jays and chickadees and cardinals, but also squirrels too will be there. So by creating vertical diversity, you're going to create in the plant species you choose, you're going to have more animal diversity as well. And uh, embrace the messiness that comes with creating wildlife habitat. So you're not going to actually want to deadhead all of the flowers that bloom once they die off, because that's where the seeds are for the goldfinches that's going to go eat your echinacea or your coneflower seeds. That's where some of our native pollinator species are going to use the stems to lay eggs and overwinter in. So they're great for foraging and they're great for overwintering. So, uh, generally speaking, leave some of that messiness behind, leave some of those dead plants throughout the winter time so that the animals have a place to live. And then in the springtime, that's when you can go ahead and clip back some of those dead plant species from throughout the winter. And also think about creating year-round abundance. So some plant species are going to be fruiting in the springtime, some fruit in the fall, like our beauty berries. Um, Dewberries are more in the spring and summertime. Other flower species, start blooming in early spring. Some bloom throughout the summertime, and some are blooming in the fall. Goldenrod is a great example right now of a fall blooming wildflower. And think about what animals need at different times of the year. So in the springtime, that's when our insects are going to be emerging, when they're going to start needing to look for nectar sources, looked for places to lay their eggs. In the summertime, that's really when their peak nesting season for all animal species are starting to kick up. Autumn, wildlife is preparing to overwinter, and in the wintertime, for the animals that are not overwintering, well, they're trying to escape the cold. So creating that cover for those cold winter temperatures. And with that, I want to leave with a picture of a very lush backyard that is no one's I know. I found it on Canva, but I'd be happy to take any questions that anybody might have in general about creating habitat for wildlife.